At what point does a team say it is smarter for us, like the Jets,
Yeah.
or I mean, the Giants, maybe to a lesser degree? But at what point do you think these teams start to strategize of this is what's best for us, bigger picture, long term, particularly if you're the Jets right now?
Yeah, I think our point of reference, Dan, is probably 2011. Because I mean, look, like I've talked to scouts over the last 2 years about Trevor Lawrence, and the consensus I'd say across the board is this is a once in a decade type of prospect. And if you want to look over the last 40 years, John Elway, Peyton Manning, Andrew Luck, Trevor Lawrence, like I think he's that good a prospect, and so. If you remember at the end of the 2011 season, there were some questions about how the Colts were managing their roster, and there was all kinds of buzz how other teams were going to handle it. The Rams were one of those you might remember. And so I don't think it happens yet, but I think once we get to around Thanksgiving, it starts to crystallize what teams are actually in the running for that first overall pick. Maybe we start to see some stuff. As of right now, the thing that prevents it from happening now is most bad teams have people in positions of power that are fighting for their jobs. So their mentality is, I need to save my job. I'm not worried about what's happening in 2021. But as we get later in the year, I certainly think that could become a factor.
Well, you got the trade deadline coming up in a couple of weeks. Can you see the Jets trade Sam Darnold, and would there be a taker? Could the Falcons trade Matt Ryan? Would there be a taker? Would the Lions trade Matthew Stafford? Would there be a taker?
I don't think so. My guess is you wouldn't see one of the quarterbacks traded. Let's start with the Jets and Darnold. You'd be gambling big time that you wind up with the number one overall pick. And I think that the Jets trading Darnold would have to be tied to having the number one overall pick. So my guess is like Sam Darnold probably winds up on the roster the rest of the year. And whatever they do with Sam Darnold rides on where they're picking in April. And so, I think Sam Darnold would have a ton of value out there. I think baseline what Josh Rosen brought home for the Cardinals a couple of years ago, which was a 2 and a 5. But I do think it could wind up being as much as a late 1. Like say you're Pittsburgh, for example, an executive brought this up to me the other day. Do you flip the 25th pick in the draft for Sam Darnold? Now you have your potential replacement for Ben Roethlisberger. To me, that makes a lot of sense because the Steelers may never be picking high enough to get a Trevor Lawrence or a Trey Lance or a Justin Fields. So I think Sam Darnold will have some value. With Matt Ryan, I think the Falcons would need to be blown away. I know Arthur Blank and Rich McKay would like to leave that up to whoever the next coach and GM are. And then in Detroit, I think this is, again, sort of a situation where everybody there is fighting for their job. So unless the plug gets pulled on Bob Quinn or Matt Patricia, I think they're counting on Matt Stafford to help them turn it around and convince the Ford family to keep him in 2021.
A couple of things I was told prior to the draft. That the Colts were really interested in Jordan Love. And then the Packers went up and got him because they knew that was going to be the heir apparent to Phillip Rivers. And then with the Lions, that they were really kicking the tires on Tua. And I don't know if you heard that, but that was from, a source of mine who I trust. But that explains a little bit about Green Bay worried that maybe Indianapolis was going to swoop in and take him. And then would Tua go to Detroit? And I was told that staff in Detroit was saying, look, if we don't make this work this year, we're not going to have these jobs. And therefore, they didn't want to go in on Tua and then maybe try to do something with Stafford. Does that sound right?
Yeah, and I can tell you, Dan, I can add to that. Detroit's really kicked the tires on quarterbacks for the last 2 years. In fact, if you guys remember, Dave Gettleman saying there were 2 teams he was worried about when he drafted Daniel Jones 6th instead of 17th overall. One of those teams, I think it was out there, was Washington. Jay Gruden really liked Daniel Jones. I was told the other team was Detroit, that the Giants had information that Detroit was really interested in Daniel Jones as well. And so it's not that they don't like Stafford. I think they love Matthew Stafford personally and as a player. The injuries have sort of piled up. And so that's caused them to at least take a hard look at quarterbacks, not just last year, but over the last 2 years. And what was the other one you mentioned there?
I mentioned Jordan Love to the Colts.
Jordan Love. I think the Colts. So the way the Colts view Phillip Rivers right now, he's buying them time. Chris Ballard was in Kansas City with John Dorsey, right, and Andy Reid, and they had Alex Smith on the roster. And what Alex Smith allowed them to do was it bought them time to find the long-term answer. And then when they saw somebody they really liked, they got very aggressive and went up and got him. And so the Colts are in that they've sort of created that window for themselves where, all right, like we got Phillip Rivers for right now. Hopefully this buys us a little time to find the right guy. I would not be surprised at all, Dan, if the Colts are ultra aggressive and trying to move up to go and get one of the top three. It probably won't be Lawrence, but maybe a Fields or a Lance when we get to April.